Your family isn't tired of your cooking. They're tired of the same cooking. In Japan, home cooks don't follow rigid weekly menus. They don't repeat the same 5 dinners on rotation. And they don't spend hours in the kitchen either. Instead, Japanese housewives quietly follow 7 habits that make every single meal feel different, even when the ingredients are almost identical to yesterday. Today, I'll show you all 7. Stay until the end because I'll give you the simple Japanese Pantry Reset method that makes all 7 habits possible starting tomorrow, even if your kitchen is completely average right now. Trust me, habit number 4 is something 90% of home cooks in the West have never even thought about. And habit number 6 will completely change how you look at leftovers forever. Let's begin. Let's start with the habit that happens before any cooking even begins, because the real secret to variety in Japanese cooking has almost nothing to do with recipes. Habit 1. She shops with her eyes, not a list. Walk into any Western grocery store on a Saturday and you'll see the same thing everywhere. People staring at their phones, checking off a rigid list, eyes down, completely ignoring what's actually in front of them. They came for chicken breast, so chicken breast is all they see. Everything else is invisible. Now picture a Japanese housewife at the morning market. No rigid list in hand. She walks in, looks at what's freshest, what's most vibrant, what the season is actually offering today, and she builds the meal in her mind from there. If the mushrooms look extraordinary today, mushrooms become the star. If there's a beautiful piece of fish she didn't expect, the whole dinner shifts around it. Here's why this single habit produces endless variety without any extra effort. When your meal starts from what's fresh and alive rather than from a fixed recipe, every single week is automatically different. Because the market is always different. The season is always moving. What's at peak flavor in early autumn is completely different from what's perfect in spring. The meal changes because the source material changes, and you just follow what's best. Here's the mental shift, and it's more important than any recipe book. A rigid grocery list makes you a recipe follower. Shopping with your eyes makes you a cook. One produces the same results every week. The other produces something new every single time. The shift, this week, go to the grocery store or market with only a loose idea, protein, vegetable, grain, but leave the specific items open. Walk in and let the freshest thing catch your eye first. Build from there. One small change in how you shop produces months of variety in what you cook. Habit 2. She masters one base, then transforms it endlessly. Here is something most Western home cooks do that quietly traps them in repetition forever. They think variety means learning new recipes. So they search online, find something complicated, try it once, feel overwhelmed and fall back to the familiar 5 meals on rotation. The cycle never breaks. Japanese housewives think about this completely differently. Instead of collecting dozens of different recipes, they deeply master a small number of bases, a dashi broth, a simple rice, a basic miso. And then they transform those bases endlessly with different toppings, seasonings, proteins, and textures. Slow down here. Let this land, because this is the habit that changes everything. The same simple bowl of rice becomes 5 completely different meals depending on what sits beside it or on top of it. Yesterday it was grilled salmon and pickled cucumber. Today it's soft egg with soy and sesame. Tomorrow it's leftover vegetables with a splash of ponzu. The rice didn't change. The meal did, completely. This is actually how professional chefs think, not in recipes but in components. A sauce, a grain, a protein, a texture element. Mix and match the components and you never make the same plate twice even when your ingredients overlap significantly. Here's why this matters psychologically for the home cook. When you think in recipes, running out of ideas feels like a dead end. When you think in components, running out of ideas is actually impossible, because the combinations are mathematically endless even with a small, simple pantry. The shift. Identify your 3 most used bases this week. your most common grain, your most common broth or sauce, your most common protein. Now write down 5 different things you could put on top of or beside each one that you've never tried together before. You just generated 15 new meals without a single new recipe. Habit 3. She uses the whole ingredient, nothing wasted. Open the average Western refrigerator and you'll find them, the sad, forgotten scraps. The broccoli stems that got cut off and thrown away while only the florets were used. The radish tops that went straight into the bin. The leftover rice from 2 nights ago slowly drying out in a container nobody's going to touch. In Japan, there is a principle called matinai, a deep cultural feeling of regret over waste. And in the kitchen, it means a Japanese housewife looks at an ingredient and sees every part of it as having value, not just the obvious part. The broccoli stem gets sliced thin and stir-fried. The radish tops become a simple sautéed side dish. The leftover rice becomes tomorrow's breakfast porridge or gets crisped into a completely different texture entirely. Here's what this habit produces that most people miss. Using the whole ingredient doesn't just reduce waste, it automatically generates new dishes you would never have made if you'd only used the main part. The stems, the skins, the tops, the trimmings, these become dishes in their own right, completely different in texture and flavor from the part everyone uses. And suddenly, one ingredient has given you 2 or 3 completely different food experiences instead of one. This is variety that costs you nothing extra. Not in money, not in shopping trips, not in recipe research. You already bought the ingredient. You're just using all of it instead of half. The shift, this week, before you trim and discard any part of a vegetable, pause and ask one question: can this be cooked separately? Broccoli stems, carrot tops, cauliflower leaves, sweet potato skin, almost all of it can. Try one discarded part this week as its own small side dish. You'll be surprised what you've been throwing away. Habit 4. She changes the cut, not the ingredient. This is the one I promised. The habit 90% of home cooks in the West have never thought about. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Same carrot. Same exact carrot bought from the same store. Cut it into thick rounds and boil it. It's soft, sweet, almost creamy. Cut it into thin matchsticks and stir-fry it. It's snappy, slightly caramelized, completely different texture. Grate it raw over a bowl. It's crunchy, fresh, almost peppery. Slice it paper-thin on a diagonal and pickle it overnight. It's tangy, delicate, a completely different food experience. Same carrot, 4 completely different dishes. Japanese cooking understands something about ingredients that most Western cooking ignores entirely. The cut is a cooking technique in itself. How you slice something changes its surface area, which changes how it cooks, which changes its texture, which changes its flavor, which changes the entire eating experience. A thick-cut vegetable and a thin-cut vegetable are not the same dish. They taste different, feel different in the mouth, and pair with different things naturally. This is one of the most powerful tools a Japanese housewife uses to create endless variety from a limited pantry. She is not buying more ingredients. She is accessing more of what each ingredient can actually be by simply changing how she approaches it with a knife. Here's the psychological shift this creates. When you realize the cut is a creative choice, you stop feeling limited by what's in the fridge. That single zucchini you've been looking at all week hasn't been made yet. It's been waiting to become any one of 4 or 5 different things depending on how you choose to cut it today. The shift: pick one vegetable in your fridge right now, any one. This week, cook it in a way you've never cut it before. If you always slice it thick, try it grated. If you always chop it roughly, try it julienne thin. No new recipe needed, just a different knife decision. That's it. Habit 5. She keeps a flavor bridge pantry. Here is the real secret behind why Japanese home cooking tastes different every night, even when the main ingredients are similar. It's not the protein. It's not the vegetable. It's the small flavor bridges, the finishing elements that completely shift the direction of a dish in the final 30 seconds of cooking. A flavor bridge pantry in a Japanese kitchen is small but powerful. soy sauce, mirin, rice vinegar, sesame oil, miso paste, ponzu, togarashi, yuzu. These are not complicated or expensive ingredients, but each one pulls a dish in a completely different direction. The same bowl of noodles with sesame oil and soy tastes entirely different from the same bowl finished with ponzu and yuzu. Same noodles, different world. Most Western home cooks have salt, pepper, olive oil, and maybe one or two dried herbs. And that is genuinely the reason meals start to taste the same after a while, not because the cook lacks skill, but because the flavor palette available in the final step is too narrow to produce real variety. Japanese housewives are not better cooks. They just have more flavor bridges available, and they know how to use small amounts of each one to completely redirect a dish at the last moment. A dish that was going one direction becomes something else entirely with a half teaspoon of miso stirred in at the end. That is not complicated cooking. That is smart pantry management. The shift, this week, add one Japanese pantry ingredient you don't currently own. Start with rice vinegar. It's cheap, widely available, and instantly adds a brightness to almost any dish that olive oil and lemon cannot replicate. Use just a small amount as a finishing touch on something you already cook regularly. Notice how different it makes the same familiar dish feel. Habit 6. She sees leftovers as ingredients, not as repeats. Now, number 6, the one I promised would completely change how you see leftovers. In most Western homes, leftovers carry a quiet weight of disappointment. Opening the fridge and seeing last night's dinner sitting there in a container doesn't feel exciting. It feels like settling, like the meal already had its moment and now you're just revisiting something used up. In Japan, leftovers are not seen as a repeat of yesterday's meal. They're seen as pre-cooked ingredients for today's completely different one. Last night's grilled fish doesn't become today's same grilled fish. It gets flaked into a rice porridge with ginger and green onion, a completely different dish, warm and comforting, almost unrecognizable from its previous form. Last night's miso soup vegetables don't get reheated in the same bowl. They get strained out and used as a filling for a quick pan-fried rice cake. Yesterday's plain rice doesn't get microwaved and served again. It gets pressed and crisped in a pan until the outside is golden and crackly, a completely different texture experience. This is the key psychological reframe, and it's big. Leftovers are not yesterday's dinner warmed up. They are ingredients that are already cooked, already seasoned, and waiting to become the first step in something brand new. That shift in how you label the container in your mind changes everything. You stop seeing yesterday's food and start seeing today's head start. Here's what this does for variety in a practical sense. A household that transforms leftovers into new dishes is effectively cooking twice as many different meals as a household that either repeats or throws them out. Same groceries, same budget, twice the variety, because every meal generates the raw material for the next one. The shift, tonight when you put away any leftovers, don't think I'll reheat this tomorrow. Think, what could this become tomorrow? Ask yourself one question. If this were an ingredient at a market rather than last night's dinner, what would I make with it? Whatever answer comes up, make that instead. Habit 7. She changes the table, not just the plate. This is the final habit, the quietest one, and the one that might surprise you the most, because it has nothing to do with cooking at all. Japanese housewives understand something about the experience of a meal that Western cooking culture largely overlooks. The food is only part of what the meal feels like. The other part is everything surrounding the food. The table, the light, the placement, the small visual details that communicate to the body before the first bite. Tonight is different. In Japan, even a simple meal feels intentional because of how it's presented. A small ceramic dish instead of a large plate, chopsticks resting on a hand-folded paper holder, a single seasonal flower in a tiny cup on the corner of the table, the soup served in a lacquered bowl with the lid placed beside it. None of these things change the recipe, but all of them change the experience of the meal completely. The same miso soup tastes different when it arrives in a beautiful bowl compared to when it's ladled into a plastic container. Psychologically, the brain reads the environment and adjusts its expectations, and those adjusted expectations change how the food is actually tasted and remembered. This is why the same ingredients never feel like the same meal in a Japanese household, because even when the food overlaps, the table never looks identical 2 nights in a row. A different placement, a different small vessel, a different seasonal element. The meal is always slightly new because the frame around it is always slightly different. The shift: pick one small thing about your table setting to change this week. Not the whole table, one thing. A different bowl for the soup, a cloth napkin instead of a paper one, a single candle, something that signals quietly but clearly that tonight's meal is its own experience and not a repeat of yesterday. You will be surprised how much that one detail changes how everyone at the table receives the meal, including you. As promised, here is the method that makes all 7 habits possible even if your kitchen feels completely average right now. 2 steps. You can do both tonight. Step 1: the freshness audit. Open every cabinet in your fridge. Pull out anything that has been sitting untouched for more than 2 weeks, not to throw it all away but to look at it. Whatever is in your hand right now, that is your starting point for this week's cooking challenge. Not a recipe website, not a delivery app. That ingredient already in your kitchen that you have been quietly ignoring. Make something with it first before anything else. This single move builds the habit of cooking from what exists rather than shopping for what a recipe demands. Step 2: the one new bridge. Buy one small Japanese pantry ingredient you do not currently own. Pick from this list: rice vinegar, miso paste, sesame oil, soy sauce, ponzu, mirin. Just one. Use it this week in something you already cook. A splash of rice vinegar in a salad dressing you've made 100 times. A spoonful of miso stirred into a soup at the end. That one new ingredient, used in a familiar dish, opens a new flavor direction that you will return to again and again, and it costs less than a single takeout order. That's the reset. 2 steps, 1 fridge audit, 1 new pantry bridge. Do both tonight, and tomorrow's meal is already different from anything you've cooked recently. So here's everything in one breath. Japanese housewives never cook the same meal twice, not because they follow hundreds of different recipes, but because they think differently about cooking itself. They shop with their eyes instead of a rigid list. They master simple bases and transform them endlessly. They use the whole ingredient instead of half of it. They change the cut instead of the ingredient. They keep a small but powerful flavor bridge pantry. They see every leftover as tomorrow's first ingredient. And they change the table to make even familiar food feel new. The variety was never in the recipe. It was always in the approach. Now I want to hear from you of these 7 habits. Which one are you trying tonight? Comment the number 1 through 7 right now. And if you've been cooking the same 5 meals on rotation and this opened your eyes, share this with one person in your life who's stuck in the same kitchen rut. I'll see you in the next one.